In this video, we'll be looking at the basics of using My Home Theater app. To begin with, when you first launch the application, you're going to be required to enter in the license key that was provided from your email receipt or your product page for your Gumroad account after the purchase of the application is complete. So go ahead and enter in your license key and hit submit. The application does allow you to run offline, but you need an internet connection to initially validate the license key, and you need to revalidate that license key within 30 days. Once you've submitted the license key and it's been validated, you are presented with this initial screen here. You're going to see a number of navigation icons at the top of the screen. So to begin with, if we click on this, this is our camera pan. So I can simply left click and drag to pan my camera. If I click on this one, I can left click and drag to rotate my camera. And if I click on this, left click and drag to zoom in and out, which is done by up and down or left and right. We can also simply click on objects in our scene to select them. When something is selected, if I go here to the right, we have the target icon and the camera will adjust its focus to that object. We can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. And now that object is targeted, when we rotate our camera, it rotates around that object. If we want to return our camera back to being focused on the middle of the room, simply deselect your scene objects by clicking in the negative space and then hitting the target button again. Now, because the navigation tools are commonly used, I have hotkeys for those. So W is going to allow us to pan, E for rotate, and then R for zooming the camera, and then finally T for targeting. You can also alternatively use F for frame. Main camera tools also have an additional set of hotkeys for those of you that are used to using 3D applications. So we can do Alt, left click and drag for rotating our camera. If we hold down Alt and we middle click and drag our mouse button, we can pan our camera. And then finally, holding down Alt and right click and dragging allows us to zoom in and out. You'll notice that up here in the top, we have a name here that says configuration and it's currently set to my room. That is the default name of your scene when you first start the application. And over here on the right-hand side, we have a little cog button. If I click on that, we get these configuration settings. So I can change the name of this configuration if I want. Let's say this is going to be called example 1, and I can hit enter, and then I can save that. Below that, we also have the ability to choose what the speaker configuration is for this room. So in this case, I have a 2.2 setup. And I go ahead and hit save. And then to the right of this, we actually have the room dimensions itself. So if my room is 16 feet wide, simply put in 16 feet and everything will adjust. Now, everything that we do that matters can be undone. Just simply hitting Z on the keyboard will undo our configurations, or Y to redo. Alternatively, you can use the buttons up here in the top left corner. Now, My Home Theater app does support the idea of multiple configurations. You might have different ideas of how you want to lay your room out. Each of those can be its own configuration. So for example, maybe I want to have a slightly different configuration where I want 7 speakers and no height speakers. I'll just go ahead and hit save as and give this a name of example 2 and hit save. The important thing to know about the configurations is that all configurations share a common room dimensions. So the application assumes you're dealing with one room and every configuration will update with that configuration. So for example, if I change my room dimensions here to 25 feet wide and I hit save and then I hit load and I reload my earlier example here, my room, and load this, it still has the 25-foot wide room. Now, also in the load area, we can select something here like my room. If I don't want to use that configuration anymore or want to get rid of it, I can hit delete. You'll notice right now it's grayed out because that's the configuration that's currently loaded. So you're not able to delete a configuration that's actively loaded. I could go ahead and load that and, or let's load example 2, for example, and then I'll load and I'm going to hit my room and delete that configuration. You'll get the question confirming that you want to delete this because this action is not undoable, and we'll say delete. That delete is now complete, and then I can just cancel if I don't want to do anything else. Then lastly, before we get into all the settings, there is a export button here. Essentially, when we hit export, it'll ask us to save the data to whatever location we want, and we'll hit export. And if we look at that file, you'll see you get every speaker listed and a number of measurements to help you place that speaker within your room when you go to install the speaker itself. We also get information about the view screen in the main listening position. Now that we have an understanding of what the general layout is of the application, let's go ahead and talk about the individual settings that we have for the objects within our room. A room is comprised of the screen, the main listening position or MLP, and a series of speakers. When you select a object, you're going to get a series of controls show up on the screen. So to begin with, we have these arrows which allow us to left click and drag to move our objects forward or backwards, up or down, and then left or right. There are also these squares here that allow you to move on a given plane. So you can move two axes at once. You also notice that below each control is the little eye icon for information. If you click on this, you can also put in hard-coded numbers for the distance you want the object to be from a given direction. This is a good time to talk about how you can enter numbers in. You'll notice right now I have a mixture in the display of feet and inches. If we go into our units up here in the top right, you can do metric or imperial, and then you can choose if you want that to be displayed in purely inches, feet and inches, or simply feet. Alternatively, if you're a metric, it would be centimeters, meters and centimeters, and meters. Now, regardless of what you put in here, you can enter anything into this location. So for example, I could do 1 meter and my character will move up 1 meter. I could do that as 100 centimeters if I wanted. We can also do something like, let's say 24 inches, and we can also do something like 1.5 feet. You can also mix numbers. So if you do 1.5 feet and 22 inches, it will combine those two together as an addition operation. In addition to decimals, we also support fractions. So you could do something like 3.5 feet. If you don't put anything in here at all, so if we just put the number 3, it's going to assume it is feet if you are feet and inches or feet. The only time it'll assume inches is if you are actually in inches. So if I do 3 now or 2 there, it'll be 2 inches. Same thing with metric. By default, it will always be meters unless you are specifically on centimeters. And that, once again, is if you don't specify any type of unit after the fact. If you put in something that's not valid, so let's do like 1 space slash, in that case, the slash is ignored. If you did something like /8, it's just going to ignore that because that's not a valid number. Let's go back on and set this back to imperial, and I'm going to do a mixture of feet and inches. I'm going to go ahead and set this to 34 inches. Now, the decimal values I find not as convenient as fractional format, so you can choose fractions, and then you can choose what the display limit is. So we can take this down to let's do like 6 5/8 inches. It'll take it down to the eighths, and you can choose what that limit is. It's essentially round to the closest number it can find for a decimal to become a fractional unit. I'm going to go ahead and just set this back to 34 inches, which is a good start height for a listening position. Another thing you'll notice here with the controls is this little cog floating in space. That is a way of getting to the individual settings for the object you have selected. So right now, this particular listening position has the ability to move, in any direction, but you'll notice for this object, when I select it, I can say center left to right. So this will make sure I'm centered in the middle of the scene. I can do the same thing for my TV screen here as well. You also notice with the main listening position, there are some options here for show horizontal angle and show the vertical angle. So let's talk about those real quick. So the horizontal angle here is currently set to 42.56 degrees. We can double click on the number and change this. So maybe I want my listener to sit at 45 degrees away from the screen. We can do that and it'll adjust. Now you'll notice there are two numbers here. There's the large number 45. That number represents the value if the character was perfectly centered on the screen And then below it, we have the true angle. So this listening position right now is actually offset from the center of the screen. So its true view angle is actually 42.65 degrees. Below that, this gives us some guidance as far as where are we sitting in an ideal listening angle, or sorry, view angle. So the Century Fox ideal is 45. As I pull this further back, you'll see that I'm now closer to the THX recommendation of 40 degrees. Now I'm the furthest recommended of 36, and then the SMPTE farthest distance of 33.3. If we go too far back, essentially at some point it's going to turn red, letting me know that you really don't want to sit this far back from your television. Alternatively, we could go the other way. If we're sitting too close to the television, the cone will turn red. Now, maybe I don't want to see this cone. If I go into my settings, I can just turn off that show horizontal angle. From the side, we have a similar value here. Essentially, what is the vertical view angle here that we have? It will turn red if your view to the top of the screen is more than 25 degrees. It just warns you, hey, you're risking kind of straining your neck with your TV being that high. Other than that, there is no far limit back here. Just like with the horizontal view angle, we can go in our settings here and turn that off if we wish. Our TV screen, in this case, has its own set of settings. We have the width we can enter, the height, or the diagonal value. Here's a 120-inch screen. We also have an aspect ratio, so HD is going to be if this is a 16:9 standard HD screen. We have wide, which is going to be a 2.35, and then we have the ultra wide, which is going to be a 2.4. One thing to note for the screen, when you actually specify the information values here, so here when I click on this eye, it's let's say 6 feet to the left side. That is from the edge of the screen, not the center of the control. So it is currently right now 6 feet from this edge of the TV to the left side of the wall. Just like the main listening position, I can center that left to right. Speakers in the room have their own set of settings, but before we get into those, let's talk about one unique thing about the speakers. They automatically move with the main listening position by default. So as I move my character around, these speakers adjust their position. I should also mention real quickly too that you'll notice there is a little line here in the room that represents 38% into the distance of the room, which is a good location for you to sit in order to avoid any peaks or nulls in your sound stage. When moving speakers around your room, the model will adjust according to where their location is. So right now these speakers are against the wall, therefore they're in-wall speakers. If I move them out into the space of the room, they become bookshelf speakers. And then finally, if we go into the corners of the room, we get this little model just saying, hey, this is some type of speaker that needs to deal with corner angles. And then if we go high into the wall, we get the in-ceiling speakers again. So let's talk about the configurations next. Now, if we select these individual speakers and we go into their settings, if we want to put a speaker at a specific location in the room and we do not want it moving with the main listening position, we simply need to go into the settings and turn off Move with MLP. Now, when I move this listening position, the speaker stays in its own location. Below that is a Match Other Speaker option. In order for the Match Other Speaker option to work, both speakers have to have this enabled, and both the speakers have to have Move with MLP on or off. Right now, this other speaker here has it on, so they're not going to sync with one another. If I turn that off, now I can move this speaker and the other speaker moves with it so that I have matching angles. I can go in and I can specify what the angle is that I want as an offset from the main listening position. And then also, alternatively, we can also specify the distance from this object to the plane that the TV screen is on. This is good for anyone who might be in a position where they have a fake theater screen wall in front of them and they're taking measurements and they want to put their values in according to that. So we can do something like 14 feet, and these speakers are now 14 feet from that faux wall. That's the gist of what we can do with our speakers, essentially move them around where you need. You can obviously also adjust their height. Those are the configurations for the speakers that are at the ear level. If we go and we look at the Atmos speakers and I enable those, or the height speakers, you'll see we have these speakers here. These are the speakers. It looks like I actually found a little bug here. There we go. These are the angles for the speakers if we're just doing 2 in the ceiling. And then if we switch this over to 4 speakers, we have 4 speakers like so. And the position of these speakers are a little more complex than your ear level speakers. So by default, you'll notice I can only move these speakers forward and backwards. And the reason for that is because by default, they are aligned with your front speakers here. So as I move my front speakers around, the height speakers exist on that same plane. If I don't want to do that, I simply need to go into my settings. You'll see we have all the same settings as with the ear level speakers, but we have these additional height options here. So we can say align with front speakers, and I can disable that. Now, when I select my speaker, I have the ability to move those left or right, as well as forward and backwards. There are angles for top-down view, and then there are also angles for the side view here as well. The top-down view angles are only valid if we're doing 4 speakers. If you're doing 2, you only actually get the side-to-side angles. Additionally, with the height speakers, there are some additional values here. If we go in, there is this show room width targets, and if we turn that on and off, that draws these little gray landing strips, if you will, within the room. That represents an ideal range of between 60 to 70% into the room where you'd want to place these height speakers. So we can use that as an alternative or in addition to the other angle information that we have for those height speakers. And for our 2 speaker setup, we'll definitely want to use those since we don't have any top-down angles to work with. We just have the forward and backward angles. Additionally, with the height speakers, if we go into the settings, we can sync front and rear speakers. That setting really only matters when we're in a 4 speaker setup. So I select this and go to the cog. Right now, you'll notice as I move the front speakers, the rear speakers move as well. Everything is going to be mirror images of one another. However, if I am in a position where I need to have different angles, I can turn off that syncing from the fronts and the rears. So now my fronts are independent of whatever angle I might be adjusting my rear speakers with. So that's really all the things you need to do and configure within your room to get proper speaker screen setups. Once you have your configuration the way you like, I would save your data, export the information out, and start to take measurements and get those speakers up. Who wants to be in software when we want to be hanging out in our theater rooms?